only diet for a month, surely I'm going to die. Is my heart going to clog up instantly? Is my colon going to fall out from lack of fiber? Am I going to get scurvy? As a physician, I sort of promote this as a therapeutic option to help people to heal things, heal various conditions, whether it's autoimmune conditions, gut-related conditions, inflammatory conditions, mental health issues. And some people see dramatic, like life-altering, reversible, chronic, lifelong diseases, which is really what's exciting for me. Lowest death rates are the people with the highest, and the people that have the highest death rates are the people with the lowest.
Welcome to Chief Life, the podcast that cuts the crap with science-backed insights on health, nutrition, and performance. Get expert advice, actionable tips, and everything you need to take control of your health and live your best life. Let's get started. In this episode, we'll chat with Dr. Shawn Baker about the carnivore diet, examining how it can impact health, performance, and well-being. We'll also tackle one of the biggest controversies head-on, the cholesterol myth. Whether you are a seasoned carnivore, a curious skeptic, or just looking to explore new dietary horizons, this episode promises to be packed with valuable insights and practical advice. So today, as I said, we have Shawn Baker, who is a lifelong multisport level athlete, a medical doctor who served as a combat trauma surgeon and chief of orthopedics while deployed to Afghanistan with the United States Air Force. In recent years, his focus has been on using nutrition as a tool for health, performance, and overall well-being. Through his carnivore training system and private consulting work, he has inspired countless thousands of others to challenge a highly flawed nutritional paradigm and opt for a carnivorous lifestyle instead. Some interesting facts about Shawn. He is the author of Carnivore Diet, a book released in 2019, and a founder of Revera, an online medical clinic. His Instagram profile has over 500,000 followers now, and he states that he is a 50-plus drug and hormone-free athlete, which is very impressive, especially since he also holds a world record in rowing and weightlifting. And one very interesting fact for all people from Australia and New Zealand, he actually withdrew from medical school to play rugby in New Zealand. But then, obviously, he finished the school. So, yeah, I could keep going on about Shawn. It's just such an incredible bio. Welcome, Shawn. I'm super excited to have you on our podcast.
Well, Veronica, thanks for having me here. Thanks for that thanks for that nice welcome and the bio stuff. But I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're very impressive guy.
It's morning for you guys. It's morning for you.
It's midday.
Midday. I'll say it's about 7 p.m.
Evening for you. Thanks for making the time. But before we start about the carnivore, I would love you to tell us about all your athletic achievements because I think I definitely missed a few.
Oh my goodness. Okay, athletically, so as you mentioned, I guess I'll go back to semi-professional rugby in New Zealand. I played there from like in 92, 93, I believe, or 91, 92. Can't remember what exactly the years I was there. Played in the Waikato with against some of the All Black players in their sort of premier tournament. I was on the All Armed Forces team, on the Western U.S. team. I did that for a number of years until I was about 30. Got into powerlifting where I set several state and national records particularly in deadlifting, where I ended up pulling 350 kilograms as a drug-free athlete. I've always been a drug-free athlete. From there, I went on and did some of the strongman stuff where I placed, I think it was fifth at the first ever strongman national championships in the United States, so pulling trucks and loading Atlas stones. I went from there to something called the Highland Games, where I ended up winning the world championships as a masters athlete. So the Highland Games, where you put on a kilt and you throw the cabers and kind of shot put things and throw various weights. And then from there, I went into competitive rowing with the Concept 2 machines and set, I think, six or seven world records in that one, several American records, won a world championships in that. And so that has been the majority of my sort of athletics. So I did some track and field stuff where I was All-American as a master's track athlete. I'd only did one meet, but I ended up throwing some American, sort of All-American distances in that. So that has been most of my athletics. Different sports. I've been able to have some world records and world championships in a number of different
Wow,
sports.
that's so impressive. What a weapon. So now my next question, like I've read it in your book, but I'd love to you to share with our listeners when and why you turned to carnivore diet and what was your diet like before. I know you tried paleo and keto, for example, so I would just like you to explain how you progressed, what was your diet like before and how you went through all the stages to becoming a carnivore and why.
Well, so like I said, I'm almost 60 years old now, and so when I was in my sort of early 40s, I just kind of noticed that I didn't feel that good. I was, probably developing metabolic disease. Arthritis and joint pains and things like that. I didn't like that. So I decided that I was going to lose a bunch of weight because I was quite big at the time. I was competing in Highland Games. I needed to be big for that sport, and I was kind of done with that. And so I started to lean down. I went on a really low fat, sort of lots of fiber, lean protein diet. I did lose the weight, but I felt miserable. I mean, I was literally hungry and grouchy and irritable and didn't feel good and, just constantly thinking about food. So I knew that wasn't sustainable for me. And so I at that time, a paleo diet, this is back in the sort of early mid 2000s, or, mid 2000s, I think was starting to come in vogue. And I, did that for a while and felt a little better. And then I somehow got into this low carb stuff, which was starting to become popular, and ketogenic diets. And so I did that for a number of years. And when I did a ketogenic diet, it was kind of interesting because this is the first time I ever noticed that my appetite was like not as big as it normally was, because I was a guy that could always eat a lot of food. I mean, I was just always constantly eating lots of food because I was a big athlete, strong, big, heavy, strong guy. And so I noticed that, and this is back in I think 2015, 2016. I started seeing these people doing this all meat diet, which they called a zero carb diet at the time, and I thought they were completely crazy. I literally these people are nuts. They're only eating meat. It can't be good for you. You're going to get scurvy, heart disease, everything that everybody thinks now, right? That people have been sort of trained or sort of brainwashed in a way to believe. And I felt the same way. But I mean, after observing these people for almost a year, I decided that I'm going to try this. And I remember I was on Twitter at the time, and I had a small following of several thousand people. I said, hey, I'm going to do this all meat diet for a month, and surely I'm going to die. What am I going to die of? Is my heart going to clog up instantly? Is my colon going to fall out from lack of fiber? Am I going to get scurvy? And we took a little poll, and I can't remember what people thought, but I remember at the end of the month, I was like, wow, I feel really good. This is literally the best I've felt in probably 10, 15 years. I was really impressed by how good I felt, how good my digestion was, how my aches and pains were going away, how my mental focus was. So I'd finished that 1 month, and I went back to my more sort of normal mixed omnivorous low carb diet, and I just felt bad right away. It was like, oh, my gut starts hurting a little bit. My back was hurting a little bit. I just didn't like the way I felt. And so I said, you know what? I'm just going to go back to that crazy all meat thing. And so I continued doing it. I continued talking about it. I convinced 100 people to do it for 90 days, and we collected data on them. We built a website. We called it N equals many, because people were calling this just an N equals one. It doesn't really matter. I said, well, let's see what happens when a bunch of people do this. And I mean, the people that did that, I mean, by and large, I think the average person lost about 14 kilos of weight. Their resting heart rate went down about 8 or 10 points. They lost about 8 centimeters on their waist. All the subjective things we can measure, digestion, sleep, sexual health, mental health, joint health, everything got better. And so at that point, a guy named Joe Rogan, who some of you may know, he's a very famous podcaster, kind of saw that and asked me to come on the show. And so I did that. And then, obviously his exposure and reach got a lot of people to, kind of realizing what I was doing and talking about it. And then, like every vegan on the planet, started to hate me because I was talking about, well, I got healthy eating all meat. And then a publishing company asked me, would I be willing to write a book about this stuff? And I had no desire to write a book. I'm not an author. I don't really like writing, to be honest. But I ended up doing it. I sat down and, knocked it out, and it ended up being a bestseller, and people have enjoyed it. And from there, it was just kind of more the just exploring and tracking people that have been doing this. And, eventually I got, frustrated with the healthcare system because I think it just does a bad job, particularly with chronic disease. And so instead of just complaining about it, I ended up, founding a company with a co-founder, and now we manage chronic disease with nutrition, get people off medications, and treat the root cause of the problem. And the company's called Rivero, and we're licensed in all 50 states in the U.S. I know a lot of your listeners might be Australian, but in the off chance there's some U.S. folks in there, so that's what we do. And that's what I've been doing, and that's what I've been excited about. And I'm still talking about the benefits of eating, meat-based diets, or all meat diets, or mostly meat diets, and it's been real fun. So I enjoy
You've
it.
done a
Thanks for
really
having
good
me.
job. Before I proceed, I have one personal question. Do you ever take breaks from the carnivore diet? And if you do, what do you eat and why?
In general, no. I don't go for a week and just eat whatever. I don't do that. Every once in a while, I might have one item, like a food that may not be carnivore. I don't do that very often, maybe a couple times a year. Maybe I might like for instance, my wife had her birthday the other day, and we were out to dinner, went to a steakhouse. We had some great food. It was like Wagyu Sam. It was expensive. It was a really expensive meal, but we had all that stuff, and they brought a dessert out, and my son picked it because my son's he'll eat the dessert. We're not going to eat it. And I literally had like one spoonful of some ice cream with a strawberry in it. And, it's something like that. But it's something that I do so infrequently, like major events, birthdays. I just don't do that very often. It's like maybe a couple times a year. I'm not religious about this diet. I'm certainly not out here to save the cucumbers and the blueberries and the tomatoes. I'm not. It's not like a vegan type religious ideology based thing. But generally, I am pretty much just eating, 95% beef mostly. I have some eggs from time to time. I have some dairy from time to time. I have some fish from time to time. I'd have some other types of meat from time to time. But that's generally my diet, and it has been for 8 years. And I don't really take breaks. I don't really go for weeks and just eat something else. It's like every once in a while I'll just be like a bite of something or a piece of fruit every once in a while. But I generally, I'm fairly strict most of almost all the time.
Interested. But for our listeners that don't know much about the carnivore diet, could you please just say quickly what is the science behind the carnivore diet and the main benefits of this approach to eating?
Well, with regard to the science behind the diet, there's a few studies that have been done now that looked at this. There's more coming. But really what we're seeing is, I think that, and as a physician, I sort of promote this as a therapeutic option to help people to heal various conditions, whether it's autoimmune conditions, gut-related conditions, inflammatory conditions, mental health issues. I've seen significant improvements in all those things with this particular approach. And so that's how I kind of frame things as a therapeutic tool to do for, often a limited period of time. If you want to turn it into a lifestyle and eat only meat for the next 50 years, that's fine too. It's up to you. But I like to talk about it in the framework of what's going on disease-wise. And I think many, if not most, diseases respond to nutrition. I think nutrition does have a role here. I think our gut health is probably, you think about it, how do we interface with the world? When we think about, we see things, we touch things, is our skin the biggest organ? Well, from a surface area standpoint, our skin is around, 1.5 square meters. Our gut is about the size of a tennis court when you look at the actual interface. And our skin is designed to keep things out. It's waterproof. Whereas our gut is designed to bring things in. So really the biggest interface we have with the external environment is through our gut. That's why 70% of our immune system is approximately located in our gut. And so when our gut is damaged, injured, not working correctly, and food does have a role there for sure, then it leads to downstream effects. And so inflammation, autoimmunity, All those things I think stem from initially with our interaction with the gut, or mostly. I mean, there's other things that impact it, but I mean, gut has a big role here. So by, fixing that, and I think that of all the foods that are available to us to eat as humans, meat tends to be probably the most well tolerated by our gut. I mean, you think about it, we hear a lot about the microbiome, right, which primarily lives in our colon, the distal part of our small intestine, or our large intestine, rather. The lower half of our intestine is where our microbiome lives. You literally don't need a microbiome to digest meat. I mean, there are people that don't have colons that have had it removed for whatever reason, and they live fine. They live long, healthy lives, because they don't really need that microbiome. You think about that, because people say, "Oh, it's so important to feed your microbiome." Well, there's literally people that live to 90 and 100 years old without basically any significant microbiome, at least in the colon, where people are talking about these things. So what I see typically is that people switch over to a carnivore diet, and for the most part, not everybody, but most people see significant improvements in their health. And some people see dramatic, like life-altering reversal of chronic lifelong diseases, which is really what's exciting to me with the diet. And, it may take a while. It might take, for most people, I tell them 3 months is a good trial. If you can stick it out for 3 months, you probably are going to see a benefit. And if you don't see a benefit, then hey, go do something else. I mean, I think that's a fair way to look at this thing. But I think it's just the gut is probably where many diseases start. I mean, I think that's not a controversial statement. I think it's not controversial to say that nutrition impacts our health and impacts our diseases. And I think by fixing the nutrition, because our nutrition is so incredibly bad, particularly these days, and particularly in Western countries where we're just eating so much ultra-processed garbage, I think that's really causing all these. I think it's significantly contributing to many of the diseases we face today.
Yeah, 100% agreed. So I have a few questions about this. So you say that eating just meat reduces inflammation. Is this because of reducing the inflammation in the gut, and then that reduces inflammation in the whole body?
I do believe that's probably where it starts, for sure. I think that's probably a big part of it. I think that I think there's a number of things that are going on. One is there's a reduction in probably gut hyperpermeability. There's some great work that a group in Europe has done looking at carnivore diets and gut permeability, and they found that using something called PEG, polyethylene glycol 400, that people going on a carnivore diet would see dramatic improvements in gut permeability. It would normalize the gut permeability. A gut is normally somewhat permeable, but it becomes too permeable. It becomes hyperpermeable in some situations when you're exposed to certain medications, certain foods. And the diet, the meat-based diet, the carnivore diet, is really good at fixing that particular issue. And I think that's probably where much of the benefit is coming from. It's also the fact that the nutrition is just better. I mean, we're just getting more bioavailable, more usable, more appropriate nutrition that we need. You think about, why do we eat in the first place? I mean, what is compelling us to eat? Well, obviously we need nutrition, but what is in that nutrition that we need? Well, we know essentially we need protein, we need amino acids. We know essentially we need certain fatty acids. We know essentially we need some energy. We need some vitamins and minerals, and arguably water. Outside of that, we don't really need anything. I mean, there's things that are conditionally beneficial or conditionally harmful, depending on what's going on. And so I think, eliminating the harmful things, maximizing the things that are essential, is why this diet has been so efficacious for so many people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you say we don't need fiber, which goes against what most health practitioners advocate. But when I was studying nutrition, they're saying that we need a fiber to feed the gut bugs for short-chain fatty acids production, and that the short-chain fatty acids production lowers our inflammation in the gut. Do you agree with that, or is it a misinformation?
Well, I agree that the action of certain bacteria on fiber does lead to the production of things like butyrate, which are short-chain fatty acids, which can have a positive effect on the gut. But do we need that? Can we get that some other way? Yes, we certainly can. There's a nice paper that Dr. Tommy Wood and Dr. Lucy Mailing and one other author, I'm forgetting the name, published about 2 years ago looking at the metabolic flexibility of the gut. And they show clearly that there are many ways to produce short chain fatty acids in the gut. And protein, amino acids can do it. We know that things like beta hydroxybutyrate, which is the principal ketone body that we see circulating, can also do that. It can quickly be converted to butyrate. It's a very reversible, easy reaction. So we don't need fiber to get that effect. We can do that otherwise. Certainly, for some people, fiber is actually detrimental, and we see that. There's a nice paper looking at rheumatoid arthritis where they see that higher fiber diets actually exacerbate rheumatoid arthritis and make it worse. So, I think most of the proposed benefit of fiber, really, I think it's probably, and it's mostly seen in kind of epidemiologic studies where they look at populations and they say that, people that generally eat a more fiber-rich diet tend to have less heart disease. They tend to live longer. They tend to have less cancer. And that's true. But I think the reason really for that is probably because it's a marker of diet quality. And, if you compare a low fiber diet, where is that mostly leading to? It's usually coming from like acellular, highly processed, broken down things like flours and sugars and starches and things like that. And when you change that out for some fruits and vegetables and maybe whole grains, you're going to see a net benefit. But that is very different from saying, not eating junk and cookies and equating that to a carnivore diet. It's not the same thing. Carnivore diet is completely different. You clearly don't need fiber. I mean, I've gone basically 8 years, and I know people that have gone as much as 65 years on this diet without significant fiber, and they do just fine, and they're healthy, and they're happy, and they have normal bowel movements, and so fiber is, I think, conditionally beneficial. I think if you compare it to the standard Western diet, yeah, it's probably helpful to do that because it just moves out some of that other garbage. But to say that it is absolutely essential, if that were the case, I would long be dead. And I'm not. I'm still here, believe it or not. So, some people would say that I'm sick and dying or something.
You're a weapon. You're the best example. No, thank you for explaining this because I think from what I hear, that's people's main concern that stops them from turning to carnivore diet or ketogenic diet because
well, it's one concern. And the other thing is, you're thinking about, well, what about vegetables and phytonutrients and things like that, right? Well, interestingly, and there's a great study that Stefan Van Vliet and Fred Provenza did back at Duke University looking at the phytonutrient content of beef. And actually, beef has a lot of phytonutrients in it because when the cow eats the vegetation, most of which we can eat, so it has a more diverse diet than we do, it is actually accumulating phytonutrients within its tissues. And they happen to be very bioavailable to us. And so there's a nice paper looking at grass-finished beef and phytonutrients. I mean, it's published in 2021, I believe, or 2022, that shows that. So you can actually get phytonutrients from eating meat. You don't need fiber to produce short-chain fatty acids. You can get that from just eating meat too, from the protein and from the butyrate or the beta-hydroxybutyrate. So all of the supposed things I need to get, with regard to fiber in plants, you don't need. I mean, you can clearly get without. Otherwise, I mean, there are now thousands upon thousands of people, yourself included, doing a carnivore diet, not consuming any significant fiber, and just doing fine. I mean, it is what it is. You cannot deny the reality. You can make your speculations or whatever, and then it's always someday in 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 years you're gonna whatever die, and I'm like, well, yeah, so are you. I mean, it's just like, it's gotten ridiculous where the criticisms are now. It's like when it first came out, people were like, you're gonna instantly die. You're gonna die of scurvy in 6 weeks. Doesn't happen. So now what? So now they keep kicking the can down farther down the road about what's going to be bad about this diet. So now they're left to basically, the only thing they're left with is you're going to get heart disease someday earlier than we, and it's again, that's all purely speculative. The farther you project out there, the less accurate you're going to be. It's like trying to predict the weather in 20 years. It's like, I got no idea. Maybe in summer it's going to be warm, maybe in winter it's going to be cold, but if can I tell if it's going to rain on January 15th of, 2067? I got no idea. I mean, this is literally what people are trying to do.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for clarifying that. That's very. I think that's gonna give people a lot of confidence in trying the carnivore diet. But I wanted to ask you, talking about the meat all the time, what is your stance on consuming non-organic and grain-fed beef? Do you think it's bad for people in regards to like containing herbicide, pesticide, hormones, antibiotics, things like that?
I mean, the short answer is probably not. It probably makes no difference. I mean, my clinical observation is I don't see any difference between people that consume grain finished versus grass finished versus regenerative beef. I've studied 12,000 people, asked that question. I saw no difference. Harvard University, when they studied it, saw no difference. So as of now, as of 2024, I've got no evidence that would suggest that it makes a significant difference for the general population. Now, there are individuals, and I've seen them, that said, I feel better when I consume grass-finished beef. Some people will say, I feel better when I consume grain-finished beef just because of higher fat content. So I cannot give you an answer that would say that one is better than the other just because I haven't seen the evidence that suggests that. There's only two studies that I'm aware of that have shown us any kind of human, data. I mean, there's nutritional differences. Yeah, I can easily point out the fact that, certain grass-finished beef might be higher in things like conjugated linoleic acid and vitamin A and vitamin E and so on and so forth. But as far as human outcomes are concerned, I mean, Texas A&M University did a study back in, I think, 2014 where they looked at grass-finished versus grain-finished ground beef, and they looked at things like a couple biomarkers like lipid numbers and blood pressure. No difference in the outcome. In fact, the grain finished did slightly better. There was a study done in Australia a few years back where they looked at grain finished beef, and they compared it to kangaroo meat, which is like, it's not even the same animal. So it's kind of a weird comparison that they did. And they saw that there was more post-prandial or post-meal inflammation in the grain finished beef versus the kangaroo meat, but we don't even know what that means. I mean, it's like normal. It's like, we have inflammation after we exercise transiently. Is that bad?
Yeah,
probably not. So again, there's just no data out there that can inform us either way. And the only thing I can do is point to thousands of examples of people getting healthy eating both kinds of meat. So at this point, I tell people eat what they like best, eat what they can afford, and go from there. And if now the argument about environmental impact and those things, that becomes different. There's some differences we can make an argument about. But when it comes to just human health, I have not seen anything that's compelled me to say you have to eat grass-finished beef or regenerative beef based on just that metric only. And I've been pretty consistent in this message, for the last, 8 years or so. I've been saying the same thing because I just haven't seen data yet that's changed my mind.
So I was more concerned about the accumulation of the herbicide and pesticide, but then I've heard one doctor here in Australia saying that there is some evidence that the cows can actually detoxify from the glyphosate that they eat in the grains.
Well, yeah, I mean, we know that's the case. I mean, mammals basically detox. That's why it was approved for, if you want to get a lot of glyphosate, eat grains. And eat beans, eat legumes. That's where they use that as a desiccant. So that is going to be your highest, the lowest concentration of glyphosate in commercial food that we would be exposed to is going to be meat and milk, because the mammals get rid of it. They take care of it. Now, when you're exposed to it, it can affect our microbiome, and that can have consequences. But it doesn't seem to have a big effect on mammalian physiology, and in fact, it's basically doesn't really bioaccumulate very much at all in things like cows. I mean, there's slight amounts. There may be something in the collagen, we might see some, but it's generally very low. And it's probably, like I said, if you're really worried about things like glyphosate or other herbicides, then don't eat fruits and vegetables and grains and beans, because you're going to get that's where you're going to be exposed to most of it. And it's still going to be a small dose, a very small dose. But again, does the accumulation over time have an impact on things like our microbiome? Probably it does to some degree.
Got it. Okay, so now I've got the big question that everyone wants to hear. I've got a few questions on cholesterol, actually. So I want to ask, why do we need cholesterol? Is having high LDL cholesterol bad? And then also, if you can explain what you said in your book about the fact that low cholesterol is linked to dementia, depression, and cancer. So if you can give us like a few main points about cholesterol.
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, we think about like lipoproteins, LDL cholesterol, which is a lipoprotein which contains cholesterol. It has a number of roles in the body. And one of it has a significant role in the immune system. So fighting off infections and immune surveillance of things like cancer and things like that. And so we know, in fact, there was a study that literally was published 2 days ago looking at people with, say, for instance, asthma. People with asthma the people that live the longest and have the lowest death rates are the people with the highest cholesterol. And the people that have the highest death rates are the people with the lowest cholesterol. And we see that over and over and over again in numerous populations. And some people will say, well, low cholesterol is associated with reverse causation. And so when we get really sick, our cholesterol falls because our immune system is using it up, right? And there's probably some truth to that. But it doesn't really account for why we see people with high cholesterol living longer. They haven't really been able to satisfactorily answer that question based on reverse causality, which they often like to do. I think that, in my view, does cholesterol have a role in the development of atherosclerosis or cardiovascular disease? I think there's probably some decent argument that you can make that, yeah, it does. Now, I will say that I think there is a lot more nuance than we previously thought. Probably many people with high cholesterol do not develop heart disease. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. And we're starting to figure out why that may be, and we're starting to figure out who those populations may be. So I don't tell people to ignore cholesterol if it's high or low, because low can be a problem. And there are people that, there's at least association of studies that show that people with very low cholesterol are more likely to commit suicide. They're more likely to be violent. They're more likely to be depressed. They may be more likely to have infections. They may be more likely to have certain cancers. So you can't, there's problems on either side of the scale. But if you're high, then it just means you should probably get more information, find out why you're high. I mean, we know that, for instance, in the low carb state, based on a really nice study that my friend Adrian Sotomoto did back in January, we looked at a meta-analysis of 41 studies, and they found that the biggest predictor of high cholesterol in a low carb setting, and a carnivore diet certainly is a low carb setting, is going to be leanness. So when you're very lean and you eat very low carb, odds are your cholesterol is going to go up. Now, the question is it bad in that situation? And the answer to that question is, we don't know for sure, but it looks like there's more and more data that point to the fact that it may not be. And I'm referring to Matt Budoff's study, which was just released a couple weeks ago, looking at people with very, very high LDL cholesterol that have been on low-carb diets for many, many years, and they just don't have high rates of heart disease. Their heart disease was at least as low as somebody with low cholesterol and perhaps even lower. So, it's one of those things where it depends why it's high, depends what else is going on. I consider it a dependent variable, which means that, if we look at, I want to build a fire, what do I need to build a fire? Well, I'd like to have some wood. I might have something to give me a spark. And I want oxygen. I need some fuel to burn, right? Or an oxygen-rich environment. If I don't have those things, like if I have a bunch of wood sitting there and there's never a spark, you can have all the wood in the world and it's never going to catch fire, right? I mean, it's just not going to happen. So you got to have. So I consider that like cholesterol. If you got a lot of cholesterol around, but there's not enough of these other things going on, it may not lead to anything. Now, I think we do have to have some caution here because, let's say you have low triglycerides and high HDL and low inflammatory markers and good control and no diabetes and great blood pressure. Those are all good things. And probably the high cholesterol may not be the issue for you. But what about if you live in a polluted area and you're constantly breathing in, irritants and maybe that's enough to kind of mix with that high cholesterol to be an issue. So I do think we just have to surveil things. So if you're going to be someone with high cholesterol, at the very least, I think you should get some imaging, right? I mean, you should get like a CAC score, coronary artery calcium scan, or coronary angiography if you want to go that extreme and get that much detail. But, and it depends on your age. I mean, if you're 20, it doesn't make sense. But if you're over 40, that's when you start looking at these things. So, I think it's like I said, I just don't think cholesterol is quite the boogeyman everybody makes it out to be, but we can't just totally ignore it either, like some people would suggest. I think just because a lot of people may listen to what I say and do things based on it, so I just urge some level of caution. As the evidence comes out, it may be where you can just totally ignore it. And we may find that out at some point based on what else is going on. We're not quite there yet. But I think we're heading in that direction. So I think for now, get some imaging, get a baseline image, check it up again in a couple of years, see what's going on. Depending on I can, everybody's got a unique situation, but that's generally how I'd approach that
Great, got it.
question.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask, is the carnivore diet suitable for everyone, including women in their reproductive age and female athletes?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly, I mean, that group in particular, females, sure, female athletes, sure. We've seen pregnant women, we've seen nursing women do just fine on that. I think, as long as you can get enough calories in, I think it's fine. I think that's something you can do. I mean, as far as like a pregnant woman, I mean, one of the, some of the potential concerns would be things like folate. Maybe folate might be low, so you might have to take a perinatal vitamin just to make your obstetrician happy. It may or may not be necessary. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say. I mean, I know a lot of women who do it without it, but I just think if you look at the potential things you're worried about, then I think a perinatal vitamin is, potentially fine. I mean, like I said, because people say, well, what about this or that? Like no one bats an eye. Well, I mean, some people do, but I mean, there's certainly a lot of women that go on a vegan diet, which we know has a whole host of nutritional issues. And the answer is, well, just take some supplements and you're fine, right? And just keep doing it. And that there's no one that has a problem. So with carnivore, if you say, well, maybe you need more vitamin C or folate or manganese, you could easily get that in a multivitamin. So, I mean, it's like, in that situation, which again, it's probably unnecessary, but just, with an abundance of caution, you would do that in that situation. But I mean, little kids, I mean, there are some kids that do this, and I'm not saying that this is what you should do or how you feed your kid, but I think the biggest concern that I have around young kids, particularly early on, is they just need to grow and making sure that you get enough calories in. And that's the biggest thing little kids need to do. They need to support their brain development and their cognitive development by getting enough calories. And you can do that on a carnivore diet, but some kids, I mean, particularly with adults, as you probably know, a lot of people find a carnivore diet very satiating and they lose weight because it's like, oh, I get so full and I don't feel like eating. Kids need to eat pretty frequently, and you just have to monitor. Are they staying on the growth curve? Are they losing weight? How's their appetite? Are they, is everything working fine? And I think for most kids, it's probably okay. But again, I'm not here advocating that you put your kid on a carnivore diet. I mean, if your kid has some kind of disease, and that's generally how I promote the carnivore diet anyway, as a therapeutic tool for most people. Fix a disease, use it for a period of time. If for some reason you want to keep doing it, like I've been doing it for 8 years. I just like doing it because it's convenient. I like it. It makes life simple for me. I think that's fine too. But I mean, primarily I kind of promote it as a way to fix things. And then you kind of decide how you're going to go from there.
Get it. That makes sense. I just have still question about the not just carnivore diet, but very low carbohydrate diet or ketogenic diet in the long term, because there is some research that shows that such a diet in the long term caused some hormonal and bone issues in female athletes. Do you know anything about it, or do you agree or disagree?
Well, I mean, often people talk to things like the thyroid in particular, right? The thyroid, we'll see like lower T3 or something along those lines. And I think, Stephen Finney had a nice presentation on this a few years back where he looks at, there is some evidence, and I think it's actually pretty decent evidence, that we become more thyroid sensitive in a low carb state. And how does that present? Well, you need less thyroid hormone to get the job done. Just like when we become more insulin sensitive, no one is complaining that their insulin levels go down, right? Oh my God, my insulin level went down. I better cut this diet out, because we want to be insulin sensitive. So I think we can become thyroid sensitive. So I think that happens for a number of people. So when it comes to hormones, I mean, you have to look at what's going on clinically. If your T3 is low, but you have no symptoms of hypothyroidism, like your hair's not falling out, and you're not cold, and you're not sluggish and gaining body fat, then it's probably fine. It's probably, and that happens with all the hormones. I mean, every hormone has a receptor, and the receptor can be upregulated and downregulated in its amount and its sensitivity level. Same thing with androgen, same thing with estrogen, same thing with thyroid and growth hormone and insulin, and you name it. If it's a hormone, it's got a receptor, and the receptor can be impacted by sensitivity levels. So I think that's the case. I mean, I don't know about the bone. I've not, I think any issues, there was a nice study that was done by the ISSN, the International Society of Sports Medicine, or Sports Nutrition rather, looking at like ketogenic diets and athletes and seeing that in general it was kind of neutral. In some cases it was detrimental, but the main thought about why it might be detrimental was due to overall lowered energy intake and protein intake. So the people just under eating. And so I think most of those issues are mitigated or basically eliminated by just making sure you're eating enough. And that can be an issue for some people because I think that's one of the bigger issues I see with carnivore diets, low carb diets, is just some people just undereat, and that can be a problem. So you got to make sure you're consuming enough food.
God, I just had
That's true for any
I
diet, really.
had low thyroid hormone in the past, but I've never had any symptoms of hypothyroidism. Like I felt great. I just had low thyroid hormones in my blood test. And I was put on thyroid hormones, even though I probably didn't need it now that you say that, because I never felt tired or I never had
Yeah.
any of the symptoms.
Yeah, so I mean, now the thyroid hormones are suppressing your natural production.
Yeah,
So, I mean, it may have been, ultimately
yeah,
worse for you,
yeah.
perhaps.
Well, now that you say that, it makes complete sense. So thank you. So next question, still on the athletes front. Do you think that all elite athletes can perform the best on their carnivore diet and without supplementation? Or do you think that the carnivore diet is more suitable for people that are not elite level athletes?
Well, I think certainly, I think elite level athletes can do well on a carnivore diet, and some of them do. I mean, I know of several that do. I think, you're going to do really best what you're chronically adapted to. So if you've been consuming carbs for 20, 30 years, you're going to do better on carbs. But, I mean, if you're like, I want to do my best on carnivore, it's going to take you a while to adapt. It might even take you multiple years, which most people aren't willing to spend that much time. I mean, I think you're looking at least 6 months and maybe longer to see that. I mean, the studies out there, again, this ISSN study, which Phil Prim's contributed a study to, showed that there was a study on endurance component or endurance athletes, and they showed that there were only 2 studies that were long term on low carb ketogenic diets, and one of them showed significant improvement in performance, and one did not. And so, I mean, we just don't have a lot of data on this. So it's hard to say because most of these are short-term studies, these 3-week studies, which honestly are just not representative of what might be happening long-term. I mean, they're clearly not. So, I mean, like somebody like me who's been doing this stuff for a long time, I can perform at an extremely high level, at a world-class competitive level, certainly at my age group. And I certainly, like on the rowing machine, I can hang with guys, over 500 meters that are in the Olympics. I mean, I literally I'm literally still able to produce that amount of output, even though I'm almost 60 years of age, only eating meat. And so I think that's interesting. Now, again, I'm one guy, so I can't extrapolate to everybody. But I think, and it kind of depends on what your goal is. I mean, if your goal is to run a sub 2-hour marathon, which, I think one person has done that right now, I think, you're going to have a harder time, I think, honestly. I think you do. But I mean, again, can you do rugby and soccer and basketball and weightlifting and sprinting on carnivore at a very, very high level? Yes, I think you can.
Yeah, okay. So it depends on the energy demand of the sport. That's great to know. Another thing that's not just for athletes, but also for athletes, what do you think about coffee? Because I know a lot of carnivore people that just eat meat. They're pretty strict, but they still enjoy their cup of coffee. What do you think about coffee and its health and performance benefits? Yes or no?
Well, I mean, this is an interesting question because I see a lot of people that have done carnivore, and I've seen a lot of people give up coffee. And honestly, probably half the people that give up coffee notice a benefit and half of them notice zero benefit. So it's one of those things where I certainly don't recommend go carnivore and give up coffee at the same time because you're asking for a miserable experience. Because not only do you have the lack of sort of carbohydrates and fiber, but now you have caffeine withdrawal, which is headaches and gosh knows whatever else may go on. I don't drink coffee, for the record. I never liked it, so I just never got into that. But I mean, what does caffeine do to us? I mean, well, I mean, it's, technically it's a neurotoxin for insects is why plants make it. But, it has some ergogenic effects, with regard to sports performance. It's a stimulant. It allows us to exercise at a higher intensity at a lower heart rate in many studies. I mean, those are the good points. Negative wise, it can interfere with sleep. It can bind, it can lead to mineral absorption issues. It can alter your appetite in ways that may not be beneficial because, like I said, often it suppresses the appetite. But if you're under eating and you got a suppressed appetite, then you run into these other issues because you're not consuming enough. So I think coffee is one of those things where it's kind of case by case basis. I wouldn't do it early on in the carnivore diet. I'd wait till you're adapted to the diet, maybe 3-6 months in, and then decide if, cutting coffee makes sense for you.
Yeah, perfect. And what about carnivore transition tips? Do you recommend for someone who's never tried carnivore diet, do you recommend gradually switching or just go cold turkey on all plant products and just start eating meat off the bat?
I think it depends on the person and what their background and their health. I think somebody who's particularly unhealthy, who's been on a high carb diet, it's going to be harder to do it because you might have some significant transition symptoms. So in that case, maybe over a period of a month, kind of gradually cut out the carbs 25% each week, cut out fiber 25% each week. Like the way I did carnivore when I first started, because there's no book on this. I mean, I kind of ended up writing the book on this stuff, but I just basically started out with one meal. I did like steak and eggs for one meal, and I didn't have the toast and the juice and the little piece of fruit. I just had steak and eggs, and it was okay. I was like, okay, that's fine. And then I added, maybe 2 meals a day later, and then 3 meals, and then I did 2 days and 4 days and a week, and then finally I ended up doing a month. And that's how I transitioned. I think that's reasonable. That's a reasonable way to do it. I mean, you could be more, measured, and you could say, I'm just gonna cut my carbs by 20%, 20%, 20%. Do it that way. If you're really sick though, and you got a lot of health issues, and you have a lot of medicines you're on, it's probably a good idea to get some sort of healthcare support because, if you're diabetic and you're taking all this medicine, this insulin, and now you don't need it, then you can overdose on your medicine or blood pressure or something like that. You don't want to become hypotensive where you just your blood pressure gets too low and you fall down and whack your head because the blood pressure medicine now is too strong for it and you don't need it. So it just depends on the person. So I think many people, if you're young and healthy and fit, not on any medicines, and you're already on a low carb diet, yeah, you could just drop into a carnivore diet the next day. I think you'd be fine. But if you're kind of in that in-between group where you're kind of sick and not used to it, you might try transitioning. Some people, it's harder to do it that way because they need to be abstinent. Because they just if they just have a little bit of something sweet, they can't stop eating it and they become addicted. So you gotta weigh a few factors in there. I think it's helpful to get some support when you're doing the diet. I mean, there's all kinds of support groups here, Australia, everywhere in the world now. That's my recommendation.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are there any people or any conditions that would prevent people from being able to go on a pure carnivore diet?
There's a few weird genetic disorders, things like PKU, there's a few inborn errors of metabolism where they have protein and amino acid issues, which would make it very challenging. Obviously there's financial considerations for some people, depending where they live in the world. I know some places where meat is very hard to come by. But for the average Western person that speaks English that might be listening to this podcast, probably not. I can't think of any real significant barriers to carnivore, with some caveats. There's certain individuals, people without a gallbladder might have to mitigate how much, limit the fat per meal or something like that. So there might be adjustments you might have to make depending on your condition, but I can't think of any real common scenarios where somebody just couldn't do the diet.
Yeah. So talking about being lean, actually, now I just remember I heard you saying recently that if someone wants to become really lean, they should reduce their amount of fat on the carnivore diet and eat more lean meat and lean type of diet. Did I get it right?
Well, that's often helpful for many people. There's a point where, if you've been on a carnivore diet, I've been on a carnivore diet for now 8 years, and for me to get lean at this point, I've got to eat leaner. I mean, that's just what I know works for me. And I think, there's evidence. Well, I mean, there's not evidence. I mean, there's clear, if you've been eating the same food, like ribeye steaks every day for 5 years, and you want to gain weight, you're going to have to eat more ribeye steaks. If you want to lose weight, you're going to have to eat a little less. I mean, that's just the way it works. The short term, there's some people will say, well, I ate a little more food and I lost weight. Well, I mean, there's short term, there can be, compensation. Maybe your heart rate goes up. Maybe your body temperature goes up while you eat more and you kind of burn it off and you've increased the output, unconsciously, involuntarily. But I mean, over the long haul, you're going to have to sort of eventually come to terms with, like if I go from 300 pounds to 200 pounds, I'm a smaller person. I need less food. I mean, it's just literally, I mean, you don't feed your big dog the same as much as you feed your little tiny dog, right? So you got to.
I'm just asking, sorry to interrupt, because of the protein and fat ratio, because when I went on a carnivore diet, I was trying to do it properly and had like really high percentage of fat. And I actually ended up putting quite a lot of fat in a month, as we discussed before. So I was just wondering whether it's better for someone like me to have less fat and more protein.
Well, I mean, you get a baseline, you see what's going on, and you just make the adjustments, right? I mean, it's not that difficult to figure out in many cases, and it's just a matter of what produces satiety for you, what produces overall consumption. Some people, higher fat is really satiating, particularly early on. I mean, I think there's a difference from going from obese to kind of normal weight, and from going from normal weight to being very lean. I think when you try to get very lean, I think you have to be deliberate in the things you're doing, and it may not even be physiologically normal. I mean, to walk around with ripped abs and super lean muscles is probably not even normal human physiology. It's probably kind of, because if you go outside and look at like native indigenous population, there's nobody walking around like shredded. That just doesn't exist. I mean, I just think that's not even normal human physiology. So in order to get there, you probably have to do things that probably aren't normal. And I think probably what's normal for humans is probably eating a diet that contains a decent amount of fat and protein, and probably fatty meats, which is harder to come by these days since we killed off all the damn big megafauna, the elephants and mastodons and mammoths we hunted to extinction. Now we have to kind of survive on leaner type stuff, which is probably hard. And that because of that, now we have to include all this energy from plant material, which we probably didn't have to back 100,000 years ago or whenever we made that switch.
Okay. All right. That was so informative. And I have last two questions that may and may not be carnivore related. Question number 1, what's your favorite book? And question number 2, if you could give only one health and fitness advice to our listeners, what would that be?
All right, let me start with the second question first, because the first one I'll have to think about because I don't know. But I mean, I think, I think the biggest thing you can realize is that you should never outsource your health to someone else. I think you have so much power over where you end up health-wise. And, to sort of get into the situation where, well, I'm sick, there's nothing I can do, and I need a doctor to give me drugs, and that is disempowering. So don't get in that situation. There's always something you can do. Nutrition matters probably as much as anything, and perhaps it might be the most important thing when it comes to health. So you've got to, if your goal is to be healthy, and I think it should be one of our goals. I mean, no one wants to live a life unhealthily. Then you got to look at that. And I think it's incredibly important as far as any books. Gosh, what kind of books would I say?
Do you read books?
I do. I mean, but I mean, I don't know if I have any that are life altering. I like, there was a book called The Compendium of Raval Navinkant, who is a entrepreneurial guy. He's a founder, a billionaire founder guy. And I think he just had some interesting insights on why do we do what we do, why we work. What is the point of that? I think that was some of that was interesting to me and informative and kind of impactful. So, but I like I said, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of good books out there. I just don't I can't think of just one that's like the book everybody
Yeah,
has to read. I can't
that's
think of that,
okay.
unfortunately.
Thank you
Sorry.
so much for coming on our podcast. It means a lot because you're the new age carnivore guru. I knew about you even before I knew about the carnivore diet. So I'm really happy you came on our podcast. Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate it, Veronica, and hopefully your folks got something useful from this. And thanks for having me. And enjoy your nice winter
Yes.
day and down in, I think we said Sydney, or where were you? I can't remember where you were. Sydney, Australia. Yeah, awesome.
Thank you so much. Have a good night. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to hear more from Chief, please like and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Comment below to let us know what topics interest you, and you can find us on wearechief.com.